So, hello, my name is Sebastián Bolaños, and today I will talk about nostalgia and consumer engagement in the US, specifically about how brands use nostalgia to increase consumer engagement in the United States. Throughout this presentation, I'll show how nostalgia marketing taps into emotions, cultural memory, and the longing for an idealized past, causing engagement, loyalty, and profits. First, what is nostalgia marketing? Nostalgia marketing is when brands use familiar memories, emotions, or cultural references to create past references that create emotional strong bonds with consumers. As Jamia Kennan defines it, and I quote, nostalgia in marketing involves associating a product, service, or brand to create emotional connection with a target audience. By making products feel comforting and familiar, brands encourage consumer trust, loyalty, and purchases. So, why is nostalgia so effective? Nostalgia is especially powerful during times of uncertainty and rapid change. When faced with instability, people naturally seek comfort in memories of simpler, happier times. Brands leverage this psychological response to create a sense of belonging, deepen engagement, and boost sales. A recent example is the 2023 Grimace campaign by McDonald's. They launched a limited edition Grimace Shake, retro-themed merchandise, and a retro video game. The results were striking. The campaign generated over 19 million views on TikTok, dramatically increasing consumer engagement. By connecting both older memories and new trends like TikTok, McDonald's successfully bridged generational gaps. Nostalgia marketing doesn't always rely on real memories. Brands often use false nostalgia, where people feel connected to a time they never personally experienced. As Professor Anna Babik from the University of Denver explains, and I quote, very often, consumers can get nostalgic about times in the past they never personally experienced. This is what we call vicarious or false nostalgia. This strategy expands a brand's emotional reach beyond those that just live through a specific era. A clear example is in media and fashion. In the show Stranger Things, which recreates a 1980s aesthetic, although Gen Z viewers aged 13 to 28 never personally lived through this age, they still feel connected to an emotional level to the show. David Abreu explains this phenomenon, and I quote, the show recreated an 80s aesthetic with music, visuals, and character wardrobe, making a younger audience romanticize a time they never lived through. The same trend is visible in fashion. Retro sneakers from the 80s and 90s have come back into style. Matt Kicks writes, and I quote, from chunky silhouettes to bold colorways, classic sneakers from the 80s and 90s are once again gracing the feet of sneakerheads and wearers alike. Sneaker analyst Matt Powell, interviewed by Mark Bain, explains, there's just too much stuff, and because there's so much, nothing really takes on clear meanings. Older styles offer a sense of identity and meaning that many new trends lack, making false nostalgia a powerful marketing tool. Beyond trends and media and fashion, nostalgia marketing also commercializes cultural icons. An example of this is Selena Quintanilla. After her passing, Selena's image was used to launch a fashion line aimed at young Latina fans. Deborah Paredes explains, and I quote, the line of Selena's apparel, which was unveiled in 1997, targeted a junior market that composed a substantial portion of Selena's fan base. Selena's memory became both a symbol of cultural pride and a successful commercial product, showing how nostalgia can honor identity while also driving profit. Brands also profit from nostalgia. Major companies like Disney capitalize on nostalgia through remakes of classic animated films. Film analyst Britton Perelman comments, and I quote, Disney is playing into a natural emotion to be nostalgic for the things of the past. And the financial results are clear. The original Aladdin movie grossed over $504.1 million, but the 2019 live-action remake grossed over $1,054 billion. Similarly, The Lion King originally grossed $979 million, but the 2019 remake reached $1,662 billion. By evoking childhood memories across generations, Disney multiplied its profits significantly. But like everything, nostalgia marketing also has its limitations. Nostalgia doesn't always connect with all audiences. If the emotional memory isn't shared, the campaign might fail to resonate. For example, Megan Poinski from the Forbes examines Robert Kennedy Jr.'s 2024 Super Bowl ad for his run in the presidential candidacy, which copied the famous campaign from JFK, his uncle, and she explains, and I quote, the ad resonated with older audiences, but a younger audience was not aware of the similarities and nostalgic feel of this ad. Younger viewers unfamiliar with JFK's campaign missed the nostalgic references, weakening the advertising, impacting, and ultimately leading to less votes for Robert Kennedy. This case shows that nostalgia marketing must be carefully used. Brands must ensure that their nostalgic messaging is recognizable to the specific generations they want to engage. Otherwise, they risk excluding part of their audience and appearing out of touch. In conclusion, nostalgia marketing is a highly effective strategy for creating emotional bonds, strengthening brand loyalty, and increasing sales. It engages psychology, cultural memory, and emotional longing. Powerful things that that shape consumer behavior. However, nostalgia must be used thoughtfully. Brands need to balance the emotional appeal of the past with the realities of the present, making sure that their message resonates across different generations. When handled correctly, nostalgia can create a meaningful, lasting connection between brands and consumers and drive significant commercial success. Thank you. These are my works cited.
Thank you, Sebas. Your first question is, how did some preliminary information you gathered inform your research?
Preliminary as in?
Like the first information that you
Oh, so the
had
first
access to.
information I had access to was the stimulus packet, and that overall shaped the path I wanted to take for my research. And yes, that is why I wanted to use false nostalgia and base my research around that.
Okay. And your second question is, what additional questions emerged from your research and why are these questions important?
Additional questions that came up as the research, as I made my research, were how brands specifically use nostalgia or false nostalgia to engage younger generations and older generations alike. And yes, I investigated that, included.
Okay, thank you very much. Good job, Sebas.
Gracias, Mili.
All right, welcome everyone. We are going to continue with our individual multimedia presentations, and now we have Moshe.
Okay, humans at least once in their lives have experienced the dilemma of being unhappy and often sad with their current lives. They reminisce about their past from their childhood or their teenage years, believing that their bygone days were much simpler and fulfilling for them. This is a phenomenon that occurs all over the world, impacting every culture and generation. Why does this occur, though? It is actually a complicated theme that lies in the psychology, sociology beliefs, and neurological factors of the human being. Memory bias, social comparison, human adaptation, the classic dilemma of the pursuit of happiness all contribute to this feeling of nostalgia. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, nostalgia is defined as the feeling of pleasure and also slight sadness when you think about things that happened in the past. Nostalgia is a concurrent phenomenon that affects everyday people's life. Today we're going to explore why exactly are people unhappy with their present and often romanticize about their past, and if this phenomenon is actually beneficial to their well-being. One of the main reasons why people see the past as comforting favorably is because of how the human brain works. The cognitive psychology of it lies in the memory bias. It is proven that past memories and experiences that are not remembered exactly as happened. It is rather selective and biased with their information. An example of this is the positivity effect. Elizabeth Lofus, a national leading expert in PhD, did research on many people throughout their career. According to her, facts, ideas, suggestions, and other post-event information can modify our memories. This phenomenon explains why people remember their positive effects better than the negative ones. This selective memory creates an illusion that the past was so much better than it actually was. The rosy retrospection effect also plays a big role. This is a psychological effect that causes people to remember the past experience as much more pleasant and with better quality than it actually was. For example, childhood and teenage years of a person are much more idealized because of the moments of struggle that fade away as the time passes, whereas moments of joy and adventure are the ones that people recognize the most when asked about their early years. Researchers provide the rosy retrospection by concluding an experiment. The researchers uses 3 investigators to examine the expectations of versus the experiences of the live events, specifically a vacation in Europe, a Thanksgiving holiday, and a 3-week bicycle trip to California. The results prove that expectations of such meaningful events were generally disproven by more negative experiences, yet subsequent recollections were once again more positive than the actual experience. Another factor that contributes to the dissatisfaction of the present is social comparisons, especially in this modern digital age. The invention of the social media has created the environment where people often compare their lives, their exaggerated and false highlights of others. This new tendency to compare one's happiness and success has caused people to feel dissatisfied and unhappy with their current present. Study was done on 143 undergraduates and their emotional effect on social media. The results indicated that most of the students showed signs of loneliness and depression, signs that contribute to this nostalgic feeling. On the other hand, moments from the past feel free from this judgment and scrutiny. Even before social media, people's everyday lives were not displayed as an individual, were exposed to the achievements and everyday happiness of others. Social media caused people to remember the past as a simpler time, when they were not bombarded with the perfect lives of others. Humans constantly seek happiness and fulfillment, but this pursuit often leads to a cycle of temporary dissatisfaction followed by dissatisfaction, a concept known as a hedonic treadmill. People quickly adapt to new circumstances, positive or negative, and return to the baseline happiness. Even after achieving goals or gaining wealth, emotional happiness eventually stabilizes. Psychologists Brickman and Campbell studied lottery winners and accident victims in 1971, finding that both groups returned to their original happiness levels within months or years, proving that people naturally revert to their emotional baseline over time. In contrast, past memories, especially ones connected to subjects like love, youth, and personal achievements, seem fulfilling forever because they are not subjects to the hedonic treadmill. People assume that they were happy in the past because these experiences are frozen in their memory and do not have the effect of the process of adaptation that creates this constant chase of present satisfaction. Beyond individual psychology, cultures and society has also shaped how we view the past. Many societies emphasize the past eras were superior, often through education, media, and politics. The idea of the golden age is common in art, music, literature, and historical narratives, suggesting that previous generations lived in better times. False nostalgia, shown in the stimulus package, plays a role, as shown by a US poll where those born in the 30s and 40s viewed the 50s as America's best decade, while those born in the 60s and 70s preferred the 80s. Pop culture romanticizes the different historical periods, portraying them as simpler and more joyful, influencing how we remember them. As people change, changing social norms, technology and cultural values can make the present feel unfamiliar, pushing older generations to cling to a more comfortable past. This shift in perception highlights how nostalgia can distort our views in history. From a neurological perspective, nostalgia is linked to the brain reward system, activating areas like the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, associated with pleasure and emotional regulation. Researchers show how nostalgia can provide comfort during stress, boost self-esteem, increase optimism, and strengthen feelings of connectedness. However, excessive nostalgia can lead to dissatisfaction with the present. Studies, including the Pine Research Scale, found that while nostalgia can temporarily enhance the well-being, frequent or intense nostalgia can have a negative impact on mental health over time. The overstimulation or fixating of these past memories can prevent people from fully experiencing the present. Manifesting gratitude, mindfulness, and a healthy perspective can help create a pleasant reminiscence of the past while still being satisfied with the present. When practicing mindfulness and meditation, individuals can be encouraged to focus on the present without any judgment, as well as it can reduce levels of stress and anxiety. According to research, mindfulness or consciously focusing your awareness on the here and now can help you remember that any negative feelings coming up are just passing thoughts and they have no power over your life now. As you can see, these sentences of affirmation, like the previous, can help you overcome nostalgia. Finally, one of the most important ways that one can appreciate the moment is by engaging in fulfilling activities that one can enjoy and bring relief and happiness to their lives. Quote unquote, when nostalgia leads for yearning for lost friends and loved ones, you can challenge feeling of loneliness by turning towards the important people in your present. Instead of viewing happiness as a journey they must complete, recognize the life's small moments and memories to find the journey itself. Thank you very much. These are my works cited.
This is very, very sweet, Moshe. I really liked your presentation.
Thank you, Millie.
Okay, for your oral defense questions, which I just lost. Oh, yeah. Your first question is, how did your research question evolve as you move through the research process?
Personally, my research question didn't evolve. Like from the start, I knew that I wanted to do the theme about why people are unhappy with their current present and always remember their past and always have fulfilling memories about their past. So personally, my question didn't evolve. It was always a concrete path that I wanted to lead on.
Okay. And your second question is, what are the implications of your findings to your community?
Well, what I talk about, I believe that it helps a lot to my community as a society in general. When I was doing my research, people didn't really have a solution to this. When I talked about the unhappiness of people and the nostalgia, always people thought it as a negative way. Like, oh yeah, the time passes and you will never be happy. But as I did my research, I found the solution. And I think that if everyone knows that, it could be really crucial to the society that we live in.
Okay, thank you very much. Good job.
Thank you.
Our next presenter, who's going to discuss the unpaid labor of Latinos in the US of A. Okay.
Latino labor has been foundational to American economic growth since the 19th century. Yet, nostalgia for us like post-war boom erases the realities of Latino exploitation. As Johann Norbert writes, nostalgia taps into a widespread yearning for the good old days, but often ignores who was left out of those so-called good days. That's why, prompted by the AP seminar Stimulus Material Nostalgia, especially Johann Norbert's false nostalgia, I asked myself, how have historical misrepresentations and racial prejudice of Latinos contributed to the prevalence of unpaid labor in the United States? My answer, nostalgia, shaped by media, policy, and public memory, helped erase the historic and ongoing exploitation of Latinos, justifying their marginalization in the labor force. Latino labor has been essential to the American economy since the 19th century. However, what? No. No, Mil, ¿qué pasó?
So sorry for the tech issues.
No sé, solo se puso negro. Ahí no se ve tampoco. Ya. Otra vez. Technical issues. Latino labor has been foundational to American economic growth since the 19th century. Yet, nostalgia for us like the post-war boom erases the realities of Latino exploitation. As Johan Norbert writes, nostalgia taps into a widespread yearning for the good old days, but often ignores who was left out of those so-called good days. That's why, prompted by the AP stimulus material nostalgia, especially Johan Norbert's false nostalgia, I asked, how have historical misrepresentations and racial prejudice of Latinos contributed to the prevalence of unpaid labor in the United States? My answer, nostalgia, shaped by media, policy, and public memory, helps erase the historic ongoing exploitation of Latinos, justifying their marginalization in the labor market. Latino labor has been essential to the American economy since the 19th century. However, national memory tends to celebrate eras like the post-war economic boom without acknowledging how Latinos were overworked and underpaid during that time. Norbert called this false nostalgia, a selective memory that distorts history to comfort dominant narratives. Here is a chart of the US Hispanic population in the US. As we can see, in 2019, it reached almost 61 million. Food describes the modern shadow economy that lives in the US that hides systemic racism against undocumented workers. And similarly, Fitzgerald shows that textbooks' passive portrayal of racism allows nostalgic myths of fairness to survive. Policies like the Bracero program institutionalize the exploitation of Latino workers under the guise of cooperation. The Bracero program is nostalgically remembered as cooperation between the US and Mexico, but in truth, it institutionalized exploitation, underpayment, and abuse. Food describes how undocumented Latinos today still exist in a parallel informal economy, unprotected and invisible. According to the National Institutes of Health, 40.4% of Latino elders experienced some form of abuse and or neglect within the previous year. Additionally, further research by the Pew Research Center and the NIH reveals alarming exploitation rates, with over 40% of Latino elders reporting abuse in the workforce. Connecting abuse reports by Latinos, I can dive into my second point, legal and economic vulnerabilities that further trap Latino workers. This could be caused by factors such as lack of protection, racial and gender inequalities in the labor market, and compounded vulnerabilities. As Leslie Green says, undocumented Latina workers are often placed at the intersection of race, gender, and legal insecurity. Additionally, Brown and Misra argue racial and gender inequalities push Latinos into undervalued labor sectors like domestic work, agriculture, and hospitality, where exploitation is most common. Fu also highlights how millions of Latinos work in an informal economy, outside legal protections, making them extremely vulnerable to being unpaid, abused, and silenced. Nostalgia for the American dream obscures these realities, creating a myth that hard work alone guarantees success, while ignoring how the system is rigged against Latino workers. 8.3 million Latinos currently labor informally in the US, according to the Australian Institute of International Affairs. As it is clear, false nostalgia creates a stereotype of Latinos that does not exist, taking me to my third point, cultural stereotypes and false nostalgia. Beyond legal vulnerabilities, cultural narratives deeply influence how Latino labor is perceived and devalued. Media has historically portrayed Latinos in narrow roles, maids, gardeners, farm workers, and more, limiting public imagination about Latino potential. As Mari Castañeda explains, these misrepresentations in TV, film, and the news create an image of Latinos as naturally suited for servitude, reinforcing economic exploitation. Social media platforms, as David shows, devalue Latino identity by spreading stereotypes of criminality or cheap labor. Antonio Viego's idea of Latinos being barred subjects means that they are primarily seen as workers, not as full citizens or cultural contributors. This cultural stereotyping connects to Joan Norbert's false concept of false nostalgia, where society romanticizes Latino hard work while ignoring systemic injustices that keep Latinos trapped in underpaid labor roles. Here are some examples of Latino misrepresentations in media, where Latino characters often play stereotypical roles, as I previously mentioned. As Deborah Perez discusses on her work on Selenidad, nostalgic celebrations of Latino identity, like the cultural memory around Selena Quintanilla, can both empower pride and unintentionally reinforce limiting stereotypes. Similarly, nostalgic portrayals of Latino laborers idealize their work while masking the systemic injustices they endure. Some may argue that Latinos willingly accept low paying or overworking, suggesting that exploitation is a matter of personal choice rather than systemic discrimination. Others claim that current US labor laws already protect all workers, regardless of race or immigration status. However, these arguments ignore the structural realities that limit real choice. As Leslie Green shows, undocumented workers live under constant fear of deportation, making it dangerous for them to report wage theft or abuse. Similarly, Fu explains that Latino workers exist in an informal economy, where legal protections are practically non-existent. Even when laws do exist, as Brown and Misra argue, racial and gender discrimination continue to undermine equal protections in the labor market. That's why this is my proposed solution to address this long-lived issue. Solving the exploitation of Latino labor requires both legal and cultural reforms. First of all, the legal reforms. Legally, the US must strengthen protections for undocumented workers, including empowering private attorneys to pursue wage theft cases, as Leslie Green recommends. Enforcement must be proactive and not just reactive, to fully protect vulnerable workers. Next, culturally. Culturally, we must reshape public narratives. As Castañeda and Fitzgerald show, education and media literacy programs are essential to dismantling stereotypes that frame Latinos as permanent servants. And finally, we must challenge nostalgic myths directly, promoting inclusive stories that recognize Latino contributors and expose the systemic injustices they have endured. Without addressing both legal systems and cultural memory, the cycle of exploitation will continue. Limitations and implications. Legal reforms alone may not be enough for undocumented workers still coming forward due to immigration enforcement laws. Additionally, changing cultural narratives through education and literacy is a long-term process and not an academic priority. Also, the new laws, for example, implemented by Donald Trump, are things that are not positive for Latinos. And the implications may be and the implication that these will cause would be reducing wage theft, improve protections, and reshape public perceptions. In conclusion, historical misrepresentations, racial prejudice, and cultural nostalgia have together fueled the ongoing exploitation of Latino labor in the United States. Nostalgic myths about the good old days comfort society, but they raise the realities of systemic discrimination that Latino workers continue to face. If America truly wants to live up to the ideals it celebrates, it is imperial to comfort the uncomfortable parts of history, protect vulnerable workers, and reshape the cultural narratives that normalize injustice. Latino labor has always been vital to America's growth. This time the history reflects truth, not just the myths. Thank you very much, and this is why we're excited.
Thank you, dear Ignacio. Your first question is, did your research go in a different direction than you originally expected?
Kind of, because at the beginning, since the beginning, I wanted to do something that was related to culture. I wanted to relate culture and nostalgia because of the Maori article. But at the end, I didn't use the article, and I decided to use George Norby's article. And because of the new laws that Trump implemented against Latinos, I wanted to investigate something about that. So I ended up with this research question.
Okay. And how do you use the conclusions or questions of others to advance your own research?
For example, as I said, Jochen Norberg's idea of the false nostalgia brought me to my conclusion because it like shaped the idea that I had of Latinos being discriminated in the US because of that.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Good job. Okay, thank you very much for your patience. We are going to move forward with our next presenter, Oliver Norton. Big round of applause.
¿Me dices tú cuando empiezo? Ya. Good morning. I am Oliver Norton, and today I will be presenting on how oral traditions challenge the dominance of written historical narratives. Specifically, I will focus on how oral traditions preserve marginalized voices, adopt across generations, and offer alternative frameworks for understanding history. This image represents how elders serve as the custodians of cultural memory, preserving history through storytelling traditions passed down over generations. This question matters because written history has historically excluded marginalized voices. Oral traditions ensure that indigenous, African American, and diasporic communities preserve their histories and identities when written systems fail to record them. Written history often reflects the viewpoints of dominant cultures, erasing the perspectives of marginalized groups. Oral storytelling serves as a form of resistance, reclaiming these overlooked narratives. In discussions of decolonization and cultural preservation, oral traditions play a vital role in redefining historical truth and promoting inclusive perspectives. Oral traditions force us to reconsider the idea that the truth exists in written form, only exists in written form. They challenge the assumption that written records are inherently superior or more objective. This image shows us how oral traditions are not frozen in the past. They are active, living forces that continue to shape communities even today. Oral traditions challenge the dominance of written historical narratives by preserving marginalized perspectives, adapting to cultural shifts, and offering alternative ways of understanding the past. Written history has often erased or distorted the experiences of marginalized communities. Oral traditions resist this erasure by safeguarding cultural memory and ensuring the survival of histories that might otherwise be lost. Judith Binney's study of Maori oral traditions illustrates how these narratives preserve cultural truths ignored or suppressed by colonial written histories. Costello and Daniels' The True Story of Pocahontas reveals indigenous perspectives that were left out of traditional written accounts, highlighting oral traditions' role in exposing suppressed historical realities. This image represents how oral traditions adapt and survive, illustrating the dynamic nature of cultural storytelling, while written history can fade away or be disturbed. Oral traditions, particularly among African and diasporic communities, serve as sources of resilience and strength, preserving collective identity against systematic erasure. Ruth Finnegan emphasizes that oral storytelling is not random or imprecise. It is structured and intentional, designed to maintain accuracy across multiple generations. Through careful repetition and communal memory, oral traditions provide an alternative but equally rigorous method of historical preservation. Oral traditions offer proof that history can be maintained outside of written systems through community care and sacred practices. Oral traditions are not static. They evolve alongside the communities they serve. Bart D. Ehrman explains that oral narratives adjust to social, political, and cultural changes, preserving historical memory while adapting to new realities. Adaptation is a key strength of oral traditions. As Red points out, societies that emphasize flexible storytelling ensure that their histories remain relevant across multiple generations. Oral storytelling allows marginalized communities to reinterpret their pasts, especially in response to colonization, displacement, and globalization. Digital storytelling, folklore-inspired arts, and new media platforms demonstrate that oral traditions can thrive even as the methods of transmission evolve. This image shows the enduring role of oral traditions as a bridge connecting the wisdom of the past to the present. Oral traditions present history not just as a sequence of events, but as an ongoing relationship between people, land, and memory. They prioritize meaning, emotion, and spiritual connection over strict factual chronology. In indigenous cultures, historical knowledge is inseparable from ecological and moral teachings, providing a deeper, more interconnected meaning of the past and understanding of the past. Fernández y Amazares and Cabeza show how indigenous storytelling preserves not only historical facts, but also vital cultural and ecological knowledge. Unlike Western histories, which often aim for detached objectivity, oral traditions embrace the subjective collective experience of communities. Through rituals, ceremony, and performance, oral traditions are passed down history as a living, breathing force tied directly to the community's identity. This image captures the emotional, spiritual, and communal power that oral traditions bring to the understanding of history. As you can see, history is not linear and it often repeats itself. Can oral traditions be trusted? Critics argue that oral traditions are unreliable because memory can change over time. They often compare how oral storytelling to the game of telephone, where the original message becomes distorted after multiple retellings. However, this comparison oversimplifies how oral traditions actually function. In truth, indigenous and diasporic communities have developed disciplined systems to protect the accuracy of oral storytelling across generations. The Western bias favors written records. Western academic systems have historically favored written records as the most reliable form of history. This bias portrays written records as objective, while treating oral traditions as emotional, imprecise, or even primitive. But this assumption ignores how much structure and communal responsibility oral traditions actually require. Written records are also flawed. Written history is not immune to distortion. It can be edited, censored, or even rewritten to serve political or colonial agendas. Colonial written records often erase indigenous voices, showing that permanence does not guarantee honesty. Oral traditions use repetition, ritual, and structure. Oral traditions maintain their accuracy through communal repetition, rituals, and structured storytelling practices. As Bart D. Ehrman once again said, while memory does evolve, the surrounding systems of transmission help safeguard key truths over time. Finally, oral storytelling is sacred and communal. In many indigenous societies, oral storytelling is a sacred act involving training, public performance, and community participation to ensure accuracy. As Kursi Yamat describes, oral histories are living bodies of knowledge, cared for and protected by the community itself. Thank you for listening. Oral traditions do not simply echo the past. They reshape and challenge our understanding of it. They preserve marginalized voices, adapt to cultural shifts, and offer powerful new ways of knowing. And after all, please remember, paper fades, but voices echo. These are my works cited.
Thank you, Oli. Okay, your first question is, what evidence did you gather that you didn't include, and why did you choose not to include it?
Some evidence that I gathered that it didn't include was some more personal retellings from history about the indigenous people of America when the Spanish colonized them, and I didn't use it because of the exact fact we're talking about, because I didn't know if it was reliable or not due to how written history is managed and coerced into whatever the agenda of the party wants.
Okay, all right. And what are the implications of your findings to your community?
Well, I think the implications of my findings to my community are very important because we are an academic community that we use the same system where we think that written records are more accurate than storytelling ones, and that is something I think we should change because oral storytelling offers value to our education and to our culture as a community that I think could really be improved upon if we started only giving value to written history and embraced the culture that we have and the power of oral storytelling. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're gonna move forward with our next presenter, Ignacio Arauz.
So today I'll be talking about culture and genetics shaping identity. Memory is central to who people are. It helps us recall our past and shapes our identity both individually and collectively. This presentation explores how cultural narratives and genetic mechanisms influence memory and our sense of self. These two forces don't work in isolation. Instead, they interact. Culture by shaping what and how we remember, and genetics influencing how well we store and retrieve those memories. By understanding this interaction, we gain insights not only into human cognition, but also into societal challenges such as generational trauma and identity loss. This leads up to my research question: how do personal and collective memories, shaped by both genetics and culture, contribute to one's sense of self? Some ideas taken into consideration are: cultural frameworks profoundly shape memory formation and interpretation. Genetic factors establish a biological foundation for memory capacity and recall abilities, and the connection of cultural and genetic influences. To begin with the influence of culture, we'll be analyzing three main points: foundational identity, prioritization and interpretation, and individual versus group perspectives. To begin with additional identity, cultural narratives are the stories, traditions, and symbols that communities share. These narratives build what we call collective memory, a shared version of the past that defines who we are as a group. According to Paul Winerman from the American Psychological Association, cultural narratives act as a societal lens that shapes how individuals view themselves within their culture. This collective memory reinforces identity through repetition, like in national holidays, religious rituals, or storytelling traditions. But these aren't just customs. They're cultural memory tools that bind into individuals to a shared past, leading up to identity. culture doesn't just tell us what to remember, it tells us how to remember. According to Dr. Qi Wang, a professor of psychology at Cornell University, culture influences how memories are represented, prioritized, and interpreted. For example, in Western cultures, people might focus on individual achievements or emotions when recalling an event. And in contrast, in East Asian cultures, people often emphasize group experiences or relationships. This difference matters because it affects what becomes a lasting memory and how that memory contributes to a personal and collective identity. Building on this, research led at the University of Cambridge reveals how cultural orientation, whether individualistic or collectivist, affects memory focus. Western cultures often emphasize object-based, self-relevant memories, while Eastern cultures tend to prioritize contextual and group-related details. Their study also found that in collectivist societies, memory recall often centers on emotional or relational aspects. This shows that cultural values don't just shape what we remember, but they also shape the emotional weight we give to those memories. While culture shapes how we remember, genetics sets the foundation for how well we can form and retrieve memories. According to El Muñoz, writing for Massachusetts Institute of Technology, certain genes, such as BDNF or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, play a crucial role in cognitive function and memory retention. These genetic variations influence how efficiently we can store information and recall it later, which ultimately impacts identity development. In this graph, we can see that the Y section is the BDNF gene, while in the gray graph, we can see the metalleel, and the percentage of memory retention rate is greater for the BDNF gene than the metalleel. Our genes don't just function in isolation. According to Dr. Day and Dr. Sweat from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, epigenetics, which is the study of how environment influences gene expression, shows the environmental factors can change how memory-related genes work. The research highlights DNA methylation as key mechanism in long-term memory formation. Individuals who experience early life stress had altered methylation patterns in genes responsible for memory and stress regulation. This demonstrates that even our cultural or emotional environment can modify how memory is encoded biologically. This brings us to the concept of gene-environment interaction. According to Dr. Tim Tooley, a neuroscientist formerly at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, external experiences, including cultural practices, can enhance or suppress the expression of memory-related genes. Now, what is the connection of cultural and genetic influences? Cultural norms influence both what we remember and how we recall it. Dr. Qi Wang has shown that cultural practices play a crucial role in shaping memory recall. These norms determine which events or details are emphasized and how they are framed. Through these culturally endorsed practices, memories become deeply intertwined with a group's values, shaping the way individuals remember and interpret their past. Consider the rich tradition of Maori oral narratives. These aren't just stories. They are carefully structured recitations passed down through generations, encoding history, genealogy, and important cultural values. Learning these and reciting these narratives strengthens specific skills, particularly auditory memory and the ability to recall complex sequences and details. Culture goes beyond influencing behavior. It can also impact the biological mechanisms underlying memory. According to Day and Sweat, culture has the potential to alter gene expression, particularly in memory-related genes. Through epigenetics, environmental factors can influence how genes involved in memory formation and retention are expressed. Participating in certain cultural practices like oral storytelling or community rituals can enhance the activity of genes responsible for cognitive functions, altering how memories are encoded and stored. While culture can enhance memory by providing frameworks of meaningful recall, it can also distort memory to fit certain narratives. Dr. Jean-Pierre Jangot, a neuroscientist at the Collège de France, explains that cultural narratives often reshape how we interpret and recall experiences. These narratives, whether national histories, family traditions, or societal values, highlight specific aspects of the past while overlooking others. As a result, cultural practices can sometimes lead to selective memory, where certain memories are amplified to align with the collective identity, while others are minimized or even forgotten. This distortion is not always intentional, but it is an essential part of how societies maintain coherence and unity. The relationship between genetics and memory is complex. While cultural norms play a crucial role in shaping what we remember, how we recall those memories, and how they contribute to identity formation, genetic factors provide the biological foundation that makes memory even possible. However, it is important to recognize that genetics may limit or enhance these processes in ways that are not always under cultural control. Therefore, the other interaction between culture and genetics, rather than one being dominant over the other, ultimately determines how memory is formed, stored, and recalled. Understanding this interaction allows for a more open view of how identity is shaped and how memories evolve across generations. This is my works cited. Thank you.
Okay. For your first question, we have what information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate, and how would you have included?
So I was looking for information about how many people have been influenced more in a cultural way than in a genetic way, but I couldn't find much information, and that's why I included the Ki Wang's study from Cornell University, where he explains how genetics can also have a greater impact in people more than the culture itself.
Muy bien. And your final question is, how did you use the conclusions or questions of others to advance your own research?
So, as I mentioned, Ki Wang's investigation, before doing my presentation, I thought that they were more, the genetics and the community had very similar impact on people and how they identify themselves, but after realizing and seeing his studies, I could see that genetics can have more impact than the environment you live in. So it changed and gave me this conclusion that I have.
Good job. Thank you, Ignacio.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna move forward with our dear Sophie Vega, who is here to talk about how Latinos, or how the Latino representation is seen in Western media, especially in US media. Okay, so big round of applause, please, for Sophie.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sofia Vega, and I'm going to be talking about Latino representation in Western media. Latinos are the largest growing ethnic minority group in the US, comprising for approximately 19.5% of the population, as reported by the Pew Research Center. They play a crucial role in American society, contributing to various areas, including politics, business, entertainment, and education. However, despite their significant influence in various areas, Latinos are continuously portrayed through shallow conventions that shape the public perception of them as a minority group. From Hollywood films to mainstream news coverage, Latinos have most often been sexualized, ridiculed, and belittled in their roles, creating false narratives and furthering their marginalization in society. A clear example of the manipulation and control over the public perception of Latinos is the characterization of famous Latino icons, such as the renowned Mexican-American singer Selena Quintanilla. Following Selena's death, her life and trajectory were honored in a museum where her purple suit continues to be displayed for the public. However, her image was not only celebrated, it was reinterpreted, as her famous suit was altered to have more petite proportions, reflecting society's attempt to reframe Latino figures in order to fit dominant beauty standards. This characterization of Latinos by the media is biased analyzed by the text Selenidad and Latinidad in the 1990s by Deborah Paredes, and can be further interpreted by understanding the importance of how stories are told, addressed by Judith Binney in her paper Maori Oral Narratives, Pakeha Written Texts. Through this initial research, we can raise the following question. How does the stereotypical portrayal of Latinos in Western media reflect and reinforce their marginalization in US society? To address this issue, it's important to look at it by the root. The media has continuously portrayed Latinos through harmful stereotypes. Results to a survey conducted by Latino Decisions on 1,900 non-Latinos prove this by revealing that 71% of respondents see Latinos in criminal or gang member roles most often, and 5% or less never see Latino actors playing roles as housekeepers, gardeners, or criminals, and finally 47% hardly see Latinos in roles such as attorneys or judges. Consequently, the impact of such persistent depictions translates into real-life scenarios, as noted by scholar Ediberto Roman. While stereotyping in film and other media may at first blush appear to be innocuous, such metaphors as a hot-blooded lover, gang member, or illegal immigrant help shape how society perceives a group that it considers as outsiders and thereby justifies treating such groups as different or foreign. This presents a deeper issue. The representation of Latinos through shallow conventions erases their complex cultural identities. Researchers Lutz and Aragon conducted a study based on Latino experiences in the rapidly growing social media platform TikTok. Based on this, they concluded that Latino characters and stories in the media are merely used to appeal to specific market demographics and capitalize off of them, fundamentally ignoring the necessity for authentic Latino expression, which in turn denigrates their image as an ethnicity when oversimplifying their contributions. To understand the dimension of the problem, it's important to re-emphasize Selena, whose image was exploited for mainstream consumption rather than thoroughly understood and represented by the media. Paredes states that Selena's dead body was frequently used to publicize, to delimit, or to expand prevailing notions of citizenship, cultural identity formation, and collective memory. Selena's image was manipulated and reimagined in a way that was more commercial and palpable to the American public. The erasure of the Latino identity in the media shapes the public perception, ultimately contributing to a cycle of systemic inequality that prevents Latinos from achieving greater social mobility. The lack of opportunities for Latinos is reflected by a statistic presented by the Government Accountability Office, which shows that Latinos represent merely 12% of the media workforce. This exclusion is not accidental. As Professor Yajaira M. Padilla argues, there has been a persistent concept of domestication, which has reinforced economic hierarchy over Latinos, reflecting historical patterns of oppression. The idea that Latinos have to be domesticated suggests that they must be controlled in order to fit into certain societal norms, ultimately undermining them as competent individuals that can be active members of society. This anti-Latino sentiment created to these kinds of narratives makes Latinos vulnerable to losing access to resources, services, and protections. Most specifically, in 1994, California tried to implement Proposition 187, which denied illegal aliens, as Latinos were often referred to, from basic government-funded services such as healthcare or education. To address marginalization of Latinos that derives from media exclusion and other socio-political factors, the main changes that must be made start by advocating for the telling of authentic stories that extend beyond narrow narratives that have been formed in the past and rather focus on thorough understandings and insights on the Latino identity. To a greater extent, Hispanic advocacy groups should partner up with large corporations to give more visibility to these kinds of stories and create ones that resonate with Latino audiences. Finally, Latinos should also be encouraged to participate in large productions both on screen and behind the scenes. The implications to such solutions would be that Latinos would have a voice within mainstream media and be recognized as equal participants of society, while also celebrating their ethnic and cultural backgrounds. They would also have an equitable access not only to opportunities in the media industry, but also in other professional settings. Finally, and most importantly, Latinos would be embraced as social, economic, and political contributors in society. However, achieving such changes will require systemic reforms from within important institutions while also overcoming limitations such as conservative resistance to change, prioritization of profit over true inclusion, lack of accountability from institutions, and political climates that push for the Latino exclusion. Thank you, and these are my works cited.
Thank you, Sophie. Your first question is, how did you approach and synthesize the different perspectives in order to reach a conclusion?
So the way that I synthesized different sources was that, for example, I took scholar Ediberto's Roman explanation of how stereotypes don't stay on screen, but really translate into real-life oppression towards Latinos. Also, for example, the study from Lutz and Aragon, which analyzed the media gap of Latino inclusion in social media platforms. And so my solution responded to these kinds of sources because I said that the need for authentic storytelling is needed, rather than just a superficial or narrow perspectives that has been approached in the past.
Thank you so much. And what are the implications of your findings to your community?
So the implications of my findings to my community is that although we don't live in the US, all of us live in Ecuador, in Latin America, and are avid consumers of mainstream media, of social media platforms. And so there's a lack of nationalism and pride in Ecuador, which is why it's so important to see Latino figures represented in the media so that Latino voices are heard and there's a sense of community, not only for us in Colegio Menor, but also for indigenous communities which never see themselves on screens.
Okay, thank you very much. Good job. Okay, we're gonna move forward with the best friend of the world, Juli Salgado, who decided to switch places with Romy, yes. And she's gonna talk about a very interesting topic, which are mercenaries and how we have portrayed them throughout the years. Okay?
Hi, my name is Juliana Salgado, and I'm going to be presenting how history erases mercenaries. As said by Colin Powell in Of Memory in Our Democracy, history is shaped by what we choose to remember, and often what we choose to remember we commemorate through memorials or monuments, such as the African American Civil War Memorial, the United States Marine Corps War Memorial, the Monument Aux Morts of Strasbourg, and the All Wars Memorial. These landmarks highlight specific people and events, but they also leave out others who've played significant roles, especially in warfare, such as mercenaries and indigenous fighters. This act of omission is also known as historical erasure, which according to dictionary.com is defined as the exclusion of a minority group or group member from the historical record or from the discussion of current or past events. Considering the previous information, the stimulus materials that I used were Maori oral narratives, Pakeha written texts by Benny, and Of Memory in Our Democracy by Pau, which helped me come up with my research question, which was, how has the historical erasure of mercenaries due to their unofficial status and declining popularity paralleled the exclusion of indigenous histories in warfare? To begin with context, Sarah Percy, Associate Professor of University of Queensland, defines mercenaries as fighters who are not members of the group that hires them and are often motivated by financial gain. Additionally, they also maintain one of the oldest professions in the world, which played crucial roles in the fighting of European conflicts between 12th and 19th century. Mercenaries rose in popularity not only because of their availability, but also because of their cost-effectiveness and efficiency, compared to maintaining full-time standing armies, also known as professional military forces maintained by a state or nation. However, with growing investment in national standing armies, which were forces only loyal to the state it belonged to, mercenaries started losing power, legitimacy, demand, and recognition. And therefore, mercenaries began to be erased from official narratives to maintain the state's reputation in warfare. But their exclusion wasn't just about their competition with national standing armies. It also came from the complex gray areas they operate in, which are places that don't fit neatly into legal or military categories and standards. In these ambiguous zones, mercenaries become neither enemies nor heroes. They just become figures that are easily ignored. Their unofficial status also stems from the political discomfort they cause due to their lack of transparency in their operations, which can involve war crimes, something no state wants to be held responsible for. On top of that, hiring foreign fighters raises complex ethical and legal questions, challenging ideas of state sovereignty, traditional warfare, and international security. This ambiguity isn't just political, it's also legal, since mercenaries are denied combatant or prisoner of war status, according to the Geneva Conventions. Yet they are still held accountable for violating international law, sometimes even criminalized as rebels or insurgents. This contradiction makes it easier for states to eliminate them from history while continuing to use them when it's convenient for them. A similar erasure happened with indigenous warriors when European settlers came in, such as the Pakeha in New Zealand, who dismissed Maori oral narratives in order to favor their written records, thus influencing Western historians and shaping warfare narratives to fit their agenda. Take the Maori musket wars as an example, which were a series of up to 3,000 battles involving muskets, intertribal arms races, and strategic operations. Nevertheless, Western historians influenced by Eurocentrism downplayed them as chaotic tribal violence instead of acknowledging them as actual military operations. Both mercenaries and indigenous warriors challenge the idea that only the nation state holds the entire power. Because of that, they're either erased or pushed to the margins of history. However, to keep using mercenaries without hurting the state's reputation, they were rebranded as private military contractors, also known as PMCs. And despite them acting as national armies in global conflicts, PMCs remain unofficial and unacknowledged by historical narratives. For instance, groups like Wagner or Blackwater now operate like multinational corporations staffed by many fighters from all around the world, united by a paycheck, not a flag. Regardless of ethical and legal concerns, states still depend on these forces. Take Ukraine as an example, who even though criminalizes foreign fighters, they formed the International Legion after Russia's invasion, inviting foreign volunteers to join, and still after all these fighters are often unacknowledged and lack commemoration. This growing reliance on mercenaries or PMCs can be seen in this graph, which shows a significant rise in the number of contractors in Afghanistan, for example, peaking at over 110,000 in around 2011, exceeding the 100,000 US military forces present at the time. And even with the subsequent decline of both entities in 2014, contractors still peaked at 50,000, while US forces peaked at 30,000. Despite the striking data seen previously, erasing mercenaries is what allows the state to keep its monopoly over violence. For instance, during the Ukraine war, which recruited Russian prisoners and sent them to fight in the front lines of the country that hired them. This usually, of course, ended in death. And despite some of them being called heroes, the others were buried in secret or neglected altogether. So in short, states used them and then disappeared them. Before concluding, it's also important to acknowledge the limitations in this research, as well as consider the consequences of the implications it carries. The limitations include historical bias, since most military records are written by the states, Eurocentrism, since usually indigenous histories are erased, and it causes an imbalance in historical narratives, and evolution when comparing old mercenaries to modern PMCs, since it has its limits due to how their roles were rebranded. On the other hand, our implications include mercenary impact, since mercenaries have had a real impact, yet we don't still acknowledge them. And this affects how we understand war and who gets commemorated. Also, we have how PMCs are seen as modern threats, since PMCs are growing, but they operate in unclear legal areas, which causes risks for accountability. Finally, we have legal blind spots due to the gray areas they operate in, creating legal loopholes, and states can take advantage of this to avoid responsibility and accountability. To conclude, once again, as Powell said, history is shaped by what we choose to remember. In warfare, we choose to remember the national soldier. The mercenary, the indigenous fighter, and any other one who doesn't wear the state's uniform is either erased from memory or reshaped to serve it. This is why their exclusion isn't just about the past. It's about how we understand power, justice, and loyalty. So the question we should be really asking ourselves is, who are we remembering and who are we choosing to forget? These are my works cited. Thank you.
Thank you, Juli. Your first question is, did your research go in a different direction than you originally expected?
Yes. At first, I didn't expect to dive so deeply into legal frameworks like the Geneva Conventions. I just wanted to talk about how I realized that mercenaries aren't as known as I thought they were. But with doing some research, I realized that they were also erased from history, and that these implicated a lot of legalities, in summary.
Okay. And your second question is, what additional questions emerged from your research and why are these questions important?
The additional questions that emerged from my research was what would history look like if we had acknowledged these marginalized groups, and therefore how less important national armies would be. And this is important because it makes us think whose side we're taking in history and how the state-centric narrative we're being told in textbooks, speeches, etc., is affecting how we see the real world.
Thank you so much. Good job. Okay. So we are going to move forward with our next presenter. Thank you so much for your patience. One very important thing for us is that if families coming to see you present, we're going to do the best and what we can to make sure that the family sees you presenting. And I'm very, very thankful, Guilherme, for you stepping in for Romy until her mom comes in. Okay? Yes. Biggest fan of Guilherme right there.
Hello everyone, my name is Guilherme Figueiredo and I'm going to present the modern day consequences of redlining. So first of all, to understand redlining, we have to know where it was born and where it came from, and that is the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a period during the 1940s in the United States, which was characterized by very high unemployment and very low wages, meaning it was a horrible situation for people, and 1 of 4 willing workers weren't able to find employment. Now, in response to this Great Depression, people elected the President Franklin D. Roosevelt for his promises of a new economic deal which would reverse the effects of the Great Depression. His new economic deal was built on 3 ideas, or otherwise known as the 3 R's. The first, relief for the unemployed and the poor. The second, recovery of the economy to normal levels. And the third and final, reforms of the financial system to avoid another depression. Inside this third idea came the creation of the HOLC, or the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Now, the Homeowners Loan Corporation had for goal to refinance the mortgages made in the United States with much better terms. And the method that they used to decide whether or not they should give a loan to a house or a neighborhood was by making an appraisal of the neighborhood that was in and generalizing the neighborhood together. So what you can see here is one of the famous redlining maps of New York City, which was made around the 1940s, 1950s. In this map, you can see 4 colors: green, blue, white, and red. Now, these were the 4 categories that the HOLC separated neighborhoods into. The green areas were the areas that were desirable, and they would like to give out loans to that area. The blue, areas that were still desirable, although declining. White, definitely declining, and red, hazardous. Now, you might be thinking, and what's the problem with all this? The problem is what they were taking into account when appraising the neighborhoods, which was the race of the people living there. If a neighborhood had a high percentage of African Americans or Hispanics or anything who isn't white living in it, it would be classified as red or white and would, for that reason, not receive loans at all. Now, with this and My Mother's House by Rachel Gonsa, as well as False Nostalgia by Johan Norberg, I came up with a research question of, what are the modern-day consequences of historical redlining in the United States? So the first consequence that I identified was an increase in poverty in the communities that were affected by redlining. In a study by Apple and Nickerson, it was revealed that these communities could have a 7.5% lower average house price, 3 to 5% more vacant houses, and 3.3% less owner-occupied housing. Now, these numbers may not seem like a lot, as they're really small numbers, but let me show you what it represents in a comparison between 2 cities. The first, Weston. Weston is a city that's historically white in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts, and as you can see, as of today, it has a 90% white population. Because of this, it was not affected by redlining at all and was one of the green areas. And the average yearly income per resident inside Weston is $241,958. In contrast, Dorchester, a majoritarily black community with 43% of African Americans living there, was a hazardous community in the time of redlining, and it's also in Boston, Massachusetts. And you can see that the average yearly income per resident is $56,000, almost 5 times less. Now, you might be asking yourself, why is there such a wealth gap? That's because of a poverty cycle that redlining creates for these communities. In a study by the New York City Environment and Health Portal, they stated that redlining is a neighborhood disinvestment, denying or withholding public and private funding, city services, or other resources that neighborhoods and their residents need to thrive, essentially by not investing into the communities and not allowing people to have a good economic situation. The communities had worse schools, worse hospitals, worse employment opportunities, which in turn led back to poverty, which brought the whole cycle together. Meaning that throughout years, the wealth disparity has only grown. The second consequence is higher rates of crime inside communities affected by redlining. Now, in a study, it was revealed that there were 2.6 more annual incidents of gun violence in redlined communities, as well as 5 times higher gang-related homicide rates per 100,000, also in the redlined communities. Now, the reason for these higher crime rates is, first of all, a difficultly defined stable employment makes people inclined to turn to crime. As I mentioned earlier, because of the poverty cycle these communities are forced into, they're not able to find good employments, which means that crime is the only way they can have of making good money. Also, because in a study by Yakub, he revealed that people who suffer from systematic racism are more likely to commit crimes as they feel like it is their right to go against the government that discriminated them. So people who suffered from redlining are a prime example of that. Now, the third and final consequence of redlining are the negative impact that it has on the health of the people living inside those communities. In a study by Swope et al., they stated that the housing opportunities of one generation may impact the health of subsequent generations. But why is that? Simply because having to spend all their money and time on trying to find a house could cause levels of stress, anxiety, not to focus, malnutrition, and various problems that could lead to health. In the same study, in a comparison between A-rated communities and D-rated communities, red communities showed much higher rate of preterm births, later stage breast cancer diagnosis, and a much higher rate of post-operative complications, among other problems. Now, this is also in part due to the lack of public investment. The image you can see here is a hospital inside one of those red-line communities, and if you pay attention to the image, you'll see that the hospital is really run down. It has broken windows, it's clearly not well kept. But this is the reality that people living in red-line communities have to live because the government no longer invests in those communities. So there's less education, worse doctors who might not have as good surgeries, which is why it has higher post-operative complications, and also because the hospitals don't have as good machinery and etc. Now, how can we solve this problem and bring these communities to the same level as the others? By investing into the affected communities. If we invest into these affected communities, or the government bring back the money that they took away from them back into the communities, they would be able to effectively bring them to the same level as the other ones. But this would imply securing sustainable funding which could last decades, because this isn't a problem that would be solved quickly. Also, creating new policies to promote economic growth inside these areas, such as creating employment opportunities, investing in hospitals, and etc. The limitations of this is that there would be a risk of gentrification for the communities, because as you invest into the community, the property values of the community would go up, meaning people would be inclined to buy property in that community, and people with more money could push the locals out. And also, it's a problem that would have to be extremely long-term, as these are things that might take decades to fix. Thank you for listening. These are my works cited.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. Your first question is, what information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate, and how would you have included it?
Well, I wanted more information on how the crime was directly located to redlining and not just to poverty, because I showed the difference between A-rated and D-rated communities and some statistics about that, but I wanted more information and more statistics because it might just be because those areas are poorer. I wanted something that connected more directly to redlining, and if I had it, I would have put it in that part.
Okay, thank you. And how is your conclusion in conversation with the body of literature you examined?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I can rephrase it. How is your conclusion connected or in conversation with the resources that you had to examine?
Oh, yeah. So all of the resources that I had spoke about how this lack of public investment was one of the biggest problems for these communities. So my solution is direct conversation because it agrees with them, and it states that if they want to solve a problem, there's no other way than the government to reinvest money into the communities.
Thank you very much. Good job.
Thank you, Mili.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're gonna move forward with our next presenter, Romy Burgos, who's gonna have a very interesting approach on how Alzheimer's disease affects the elders.
Alzheimer's disease is not just the erosion of memory, it's the quiet unraveling of personal identity. As the brain deteriorates, reality becomes fragmented, and reality is the thing that people use to go, often reshaping it into something safer, softer, and easier to bear. This phenomenon, known as false nostalgia, becomes a coping mechanism blurring the line between imagination and reality. According to the Alzheimer's Association, in 2024, over 6.9 million Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's. Although some people may consider Alzheimer's to be a disease that only impacts memory, they must also consider that it impacts their self-identity. While the disease uses long-term memories, they dominate, as short-term memories fade away. This leads individuals to think they are still the person they once were. This inevitably raises the question: how do early life stressors and Alzheimer's disease impact self-perception and identity in elders, especially through nostalgia and childhood experiences? Hello, my name is Romina Burgos, and today I'll explore how Alzheimer's disease distorts identity through time-shifting, memory loss, and false nostalgia in childhood experiences. To understand the relationship between identity, Alzheimer's, and nostalgia, we can draw valuable insights from the concepts of John Norberg's false nostalgia. In this article, he explains the risk of false nostalgia and abuse in dementia. We can also draw insights from the 2024 Alzheimer's Disease Vaccine Report, which analyzes and provides data on how Alzheimer's disease deteriorates memory loss. Together, these sources show how individuals with Alzheimer's may reshape their sense of life and how their current imagination is what they think of it, and it's not reality. As previously mentioned, the first effect is known as the time phenomenon known as time shifting, where individuals mentally return to earlier stages of their lives. This dislocation leads to confusion and distress as their internal world no longer matches their current world. According to Alzheimer's Society 2023, individuals with Alzheimer's often lose short-term memory while older memories stay vivid. This leads to patients to believe they are young again, preparing for work, raising their children, and even searching for long-searched loved ones. This regression is more than memory loss. It is a shift in self-perception. Following this idea, Celia Rona explains this through three key concepts, which are existential coordinates, paradoxical meaning, and memories of consequences. Existential coordinates are significant life roles that anchor identity, while paradoxical meanings arise when familiar activities no longer matches one's current self. And finally, memories of consequence are emotionally charged recollections that impede the acceptance of new experiences. Together, these elements cause Alzheimer's patients to idolize the past, reject reality, and heighten emotional distress. When these memories dominate, they create a sense of continuity rooted in the past rather than in the present. Norberg's idea of false nostalgia becomes a deeper layer. These memories are not just persistent, they're often idolized. The past becomes emotionally safer than the present, which often creates a comforting but distorted self-image. This ultimately builds identity on a fragile foundation, which in emotional distress is current and it lives between elders. This time-shifting and fragmented sense of self contributes to the loss of self-identity roles, particularly within family roles. Research by Colegio and Mansfield highlights that individual self-perception is used, such as mother, spouse, or provider, are central to an individual's self-perception. However, as Alzheimer's disease progresses, patients often lose the ability to recognize loved ones or comprehend their family relationships in family dynamics. This leads to children taking care of parents who no longer recognize them or spouses who have lost their love with memory. According to the Alzheimer's Association, in the United States, about 10% care for a spouse, and over half are family members. This leads to people and children going into the Alzheimer's generation. This means people balancing care for both their parents and their children.
This aligns with Chad Jerry's findings, who notes that the loss of these roles can cause significant personality changes, which decrease extroversion and increase neuroticism. With both of these perspectives in mind, Mack, a scholar, researcher, explains that Alzheimer's impairs autobiographical memory, making it harder for individuals to connect with their past selves. This disrupts daily decision-making, strains family relationships, as roles and identity shifts. As patients regress into earlier stages of their lives, they hold on to an idealized past that no longer exists. Norberg's idea of false nostalgia adds a deeper layer, making false nostalgia deepen the loss between family and both the family and the patient. As roles and dynamics and identity shift, loved ones struggle to change and interact with a changing dynamic. Building on this previous concept, the last and most impactful effect is the false nostalgia in childhood experiences. This shows how trauma can resurface as Alzheimer's progresses. As patients lose recent memories, their minds revert to earlier stages, bringing up emotionally intense or repressed emotions. This is why, according to the Alzheimer's Society in 2023, early stress and trauma influence the progression of Alzheimer's. Because of this, it's important to examine the long-term impacts of early trauma. According to Colegio scholar, adverse childhood experiences, commonly known as ACE, significantly increase an individual's risk of developing Alzheimer's, which consequently impact the construction of self-perception and identity later in life. Now, let's shift to the role of false nostalgia in this context. As suggested by Norberg, for dementia, he quotes, "For dementia sufferers, nostalgia can help establish some sense of personal continuity. However, he does warn that it can be misleading, since it idolizes the past and overlooks complex or painful realities, especially for those who experience trauma in childhood." This brings us to wonder, how did the childhood trauma physically affects the brain? According to Mosseri, the brain regions most affected by Alzheimer's are also the ones that take the longest to mature in childhood, leading and specifying that adverse childhood environments can hinder the proper development, making these regions more susceptible to generation through ages. Rather than romanticizing the past, it is important to understand how early life stressors like childhood trauma shape cognitive health, particularly with Alzheimer's. This idealized view of childhood complicates our understanding and treatment of cognitive decline, making false nostalgia and reality clash. Beyond understanding these findings, it is important to also address the research limitations and implications of understanding the childhood experiences. The limitations include, it's very hard to isolate childhood stress as the main cause of Alzheimer's. This is very hard to only not consider the genetics and environmental factors that are at risk. Also, the final limitation is that research is limited by ethics and time. Although there does exist limitations, there are implications that combine with this. The first implication being is if we approach with this, we can focus more on facts than memory. Also, that they will provide early life insights that can guide prevention and supports healthier science-based aging. Early life stressors such as childhood trauma deeply influence self-perception and identity in elders with Alzheimer's. Nostalgia may offer comfort, but it can also distort their reality and mask the long-term impact of early experiences. As patients regress into earlier stages of their life, idealized memories can shape their cognitive health. Moving from romanticized nostalgia to a science-based understanding of Alzheimer's can enhance cognitive resilience and support a healthier sense of self for aging individuals. In the end, nostalgia remembers and science protects. Thank you so much. These are my works cited.
Thank you very much, Romy. Your first question is, did your research go in a different direction than you originally expected?
Yes, so at first my research was only focused on how it affects self-perception. And once I realized that self-perception and identity are completely different things, I realized that I had to look more deeply. And when I read the article of Mosseri, which was talking about the ACEs and the childhood trauma, how it deeply affects, my research was going more into why Alzheimer's happens and the effects that come within.
Okay. And your second question is, what additional questions emerged from your research and why are these questions important?
So the main question that emerged from my research was, what are the current treatments that exist to treat Alzheimer's patients? Because once I realized that there's the majority of treatments that exist are in household for Alzheimer's, or as mostly known in Spanish as ancianatos, once I realized that we needed to change, my information was based in how the, my conclusion, my additional questions that emerged were that the majority of the treatments that exist are only based on nostalgia. So we have to shift of the findings made by Cohen and Mansfield. They showed me that they gave a higher percent if you use scientific basing, and with the ACEs contributing to find the importance of the question. And this question is important because it demonstrates how various perspectives already exist regarding nostalgia, but also how we have to look more for science-based.
Okay, thank you very much. Good job, Romy. Okay, so we're gonna move on with our next presenter, Mavi, who tends to struggle finding a research question, but once she does, she is amazing in the information that she can find. So, Mavi, I'll let you know when you can start.
Historically, stereotypes have had a malignant effect on the characterization of Black, Latinos, Asian Americans, and American Indians. Hi, I'm Maria Virginia Paredes, and today I will be talking about the colonization of the female body and the negative stereotypes on BIPOC women. Before starting, it's important to know that BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Throughout time, women have suffered from a lot of adversities because of their gender, and because of being classified as BIPOC, they are always being compared to the Western beauty standards, because appearances is what all people look at. Basically, without these negative stereotypes, society wouldn't be as divided as it is nowadays. Worldwide, 70% of Black women, 59% of Latinas, and 60% of Asian Americans and Pacific Islander women suffer from discrimination, from racial discrimination. To better understand this problem, let's view it from the perspective of a famous figure, Selena Quintanilla. She was a Latina who grew up in a working-class family in Molina. Because she was a Latina, things were increasingly harder. She had to sacrifice herself in many ways to get to the point where she was, taking into account that there is not a single person in this world who doesn't judge. Based on the article Selenidad and Latinidad in the 1990s by Deborah Paredes and My Mother's House by Rachel Gansa, I was able to come with this research question. How does the historical and ongoing suppression of BIPOC groups contribute to the colonization of the female body and the creation of negative stereotypes? To begin with, the colonization of the female body refers to the ongoing cycle in which societal structures and powerful bodies have taken full control of women's bodies, character, actions, and development of all the BIPOC women, taking into account that the patriarchal societies are the ones which have created a total or a majority of control of BIPOC women. Shall we play dumb because we are supposed to be good wives, and good wives are obedient, and to be obedient, one must learn not to see, not to hear, and not to think, are the feelings expressed by a post-prisoner Iraqi woman who was able to flee from Iran and is now sharing her experiences of how controlled she lived. Moreover, that expression squaw refers to a direct insult towards indigenous women's bodies, in which they are not allowed to describe any part of their appearance or say anything about their bodies. With this in mind, it is once again revealed that they are comparing the perfect white bodies with the beast of indigenous women. Furthermore, in the article of My Mother's House, it is shown once again how everything is based on the bodies and the appearance. There is this Black girl who wants to marry the guy she loves, but she always receives comments like engagements are what white girls do. Moving on, the colonization of the female body goes by hand with the imposition of beauty standards. These standards appear due to the European countries because they have a lot of influence and have strong ideas that are ingrained in the life of almost every single human being. This graph above shows the rates of racism on women depending on the skin tone, showing that Black women are the ones who are still suffering the most with a 69%. According to the Western beauty standards, women need to be thin, have big breasts and butt, have thin lips, large and light eyes, be tall, have a small nose, and have light hair and skin. In this image above, you can see how some of the many comments that women are exposed to at their daily lives. For example, you are too hairy, you dress too provocatively, you have too many piercings, you should work out, or you should eat more. The thing to have in mind here is that the question that never leaves the minds of BIPOC women is, what will the rest think? To continue, Paredes' article mentions some of the critiques towards Selena's body because at her museum, some fans said that she was little, she was skinny, she had big legs, and they said that the mannequins had false measurements because it wasn't possible that a Latina had those types, that type of body. To continue on, everything is an ongoing process. With the presence of negative stereotypes and standards of women, they are being objectified and sexualized. Nunali states that there have always been stereotypes classifying BIPOC women as lazy, unintelligent, hypersexual, and violent. Furthermore, Black feminism have informed that during the enslavement, African American women were used for reproduction, for sexual services, were displayed nude in auctions, and were used to ensure the white leisure. Similarly, Islamic women expressed their feelings that they are feeling objectified because of the use of hijabs. The governments are each time including more and more limitations that are making men have more control over women and are leaving them aside. Adding to what was mentioned previously, BIPOC women live in a fake world because they are constantly trying to fit in with the Western beauty standards, which is nearly impossible because each race has its unique traits. Deborah wrote, adding about the impact of stereotypes, Deborah wrote stated that people who are less attractive will always be ignored and will be left aside in society. The effects of stereotypes include psychological, racial, and biological trauma, in which it includes depression, anxiety, mental health illnesses, and eating disorders. According to Rode, people would rather be hit by a truck or be stupid or mean than be fat. Moreover, statistics by the Fawcett Society show how Black women are being impacted by these stereotypes because 37% have changed their language, 26% have changed their hairstyle, 28% have changed their food they eat, and 22% have changed their names, and this is all to try to fit in the ideal standards. Finally, patriarchal societies are the ones that have taken full control over women, and the oppression towards BIPOC groups are the ones that have created all the gaps in society. Although feminism has risen and women have been able to decolonize their bodies somehow, the term of BIPOC is still leaving them behind because they are not only having to fight for their gender, but also of their race. It is important to recognize the perseverance and how strong these women are because it's definitely not easy to receive all these comments on your daily lives. Finally, little by little, society must tear down these stereotypes. The idea of total control and the barriers between the races must be eliminated to create a most inclusive society for women and a safe space for them. Because in the end, no matter the race, women should be treated equally because each one has a unique trait that will contribute to a positive impact in society. Thank you, and these are my works cited.
Thank you, Mavi. Your first oral defense question is, how did some preliminary information you gathered inform your research?
So the first information that I needed to gather was specifically now that I was sure that I was going to do about BIPOC groups, I started gathering information about the history behind BIPOC groups, and then I specifically delved deeper into like each race and how behind history they have faced racism. So with that in mind, I was able to continue with my research so that I could compare how the race has or either advanced or go back because of of how discrimination has gone.
Thank you. And what are the implications of your findings to your community?
So the implications to my findings to my community are that most people in the world live with a blind mindset of what happens in the world. They are just focusing on what happens to them and their daily lives. But after I researched about this, I was able to find that there are not only Blacks and Indigenous, but there are many races that are included in the term BIPOC. So there are many races that are being left behind, and because they are not so common, people think that they are not facing this reality. So it's important for people to be aware of what's happening in the world so that they can start, as I mentioned before, breaking these stereotypes and start thinking in a different way.
Thank you so much. Good job. Okay, we're gonna move forward with our next presenter, Martin, and his passion for the economics and everything related to it is bringing an analysis of how nostalgia can be used for marketing. Yeah, like taste preferences and consumer preferences.
Okay, so hello, my name is Martin Rosero, and today we'll talk about how the use of nostalgic marketing can influence consumer taste preferences. So it's important to note that nostalgia, as defined by Professor Sedikides at the University of Southampton, is a sentimental longing for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. It's also very important to recall that in times of uncertainty is when nostalgia surges the most, as it brings emotional comfort and familiarity. According to Professor Maurice Holbrook and Schneider from Penn State, they explain that marketers actually take advantage of this nostalgic surge in times of crises to build emotional brand loyalty. So, when we look at why is nostalgia currently dominating the market, it's because we live in a world with a lot of global instability currently. We have just exited a pandemic and we have many ongoing wars. This, alongside the fact that we have a memory overload due to technology and the amount of time that we spend in front of screens, does not allow us to recall the past in the way that we used to. All of these crises induce a longing for familiarity. And according to Professor Walshlut from University of Southampton, nostalgia increases when individuals experience existential threats. With this in mind, as well as through the stimulus material of the Maori oral narratives by Pakeha and False Nostalgia by Johan Norberg, I came to my research question of how does the use of nostalgia in marketing influence consumer-making decisions and shape identity-based behaviors? So the first way on why nostalgia is so important in influencing decision-making is because it creates stability. In times of crisis, humans search for an emotional anchor. Nostalgia provides this by bringing both familiarity and joy to the table. And when brands successfully connect those happy memories with their own products, we create what is called as brand trust. We see times such as the Great Depression, World War II, post-9/11, and even COVID-19 all be times in which nostalgia surged, in which nostalgic marketing surged. This is best explained by Professor Pereira, by professional Victor Pereira, a professional psychologist, explaining that nostalgic sentiment surges in times of uncertainty. The best example of this that we can see in the modern world is the Lego Rebuild the World campaign. In 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, Lego launched a campaign to try to rebuild the world we were currently losing thanks to COVID. This was aimed at both adults and children. They were trying to rebuild on childhood joy that we had of building the Lego experiences by making Lego become an emotional anchor by providing lockdown comfort and associating the Lego branding and the buildings we were constructing ourselves to the world we had before COVID. They said it themselves. We hope to encourage children and the child in all of us to use creativity to rebuild the world around us, according to Julia Golden, an executive at Lego. They were effectively trying to connect Lego with our joyful childhood memories to keep us going back to the brand. So, we as humans have the tendency to recall the past in a more favorable manner than it actually was. According to a study in Columbia University, when they interrogated about 300 children and asked them about their summer experiences, they recalled mostly the positive aspects of it. And marketers can further capitalize on this by the creation of a so-called golden age, exaggerating the past to make it look much better than it actually was. This is achieved through idealization, emotional editing, an erasure of reality, and memory reconstruction. When we take a look at the past and we think of eras such as the 1950s, we think of an era filled with joy, retro cars, wacky hairstyles, and everyone smiling. This is exactly what is portrayed in the ads, such as this Coca-Cola ad over here representing the 1950s. This is the so-called golden age that companies want us to believe actually happened. However, most of the times, this does not truly reflect the crises that were experienced during those times. According to the stimulus material from Stimulus A, Johan Norberg actually warns us about this recreation of a false past. He states that nostalgia reconstructs a past that may never have actually existed. And the most obvious example that we see this in modern days is the Donald Trump Make America Great Again campaign. Trump promised the United States a return to a golden age, which in reality was simply an idealization of history. He used our tendency to remember the past more vividly and better in comparison to the future to create a sort of stability which would bring him voter allegiance. This in itself is a form of emotional manipulation. Professor El Genius at the University of Gothenburg explains this the best by stating that nationalist nostalgia capitalizing on loss, idealization, and resentment, the three pillars that Donald Trump used to compare the present to the past. So when does this actually become a pressing issue? We as humans usually let our past experiences shape who we currently are. This is called as identity construction. However, this leaves us very vulnerable to manipulation. Self-continuity is a form of identity construction in which we specifically grab fragments of our past that brought us joy and familiarity to our present selves. This allows us to believe that even though we're in a world that is constantly changing and we're growing older, part of ourselves does not truly change, we're the same. However, when companies effectively tap into these emotionally charged memories, they make their brand associate with our identity. They make their brand no longer simply associated to us by preference, but instead it becomes part of us. This is best explained by Professor Belk from the New York University as stating that possessions are extensions of oneself. So once marketers have effectively tapped into our identity and made us recognize ourselves as part of their brand, we no longer buy their products because we like them. We buy their products because we need to reaffirm who we truly are. This made me come to the solution of building critical emotional media literacy. This basically means that we will need to recognize emotional appeals and teach the broader audience to spot nostalgic marketing cues. This would increase memory awareness to make people question if nostalgic cues are actually true or if it's just an exaggeration of the past. All of this would be done through a curriculum shift in order to expand media literacy education to include both emotional and psychological persuasion tactics. What would this imply on the broader world? We would be empowering consumers to be able to resist more emotional manipulation. We would be preserving rational autonomy, as most of the decisions nowadays would be driven by conscious thought instead of triggered memory. And we would raise awareness, as emotional exploitation would now stop marking elections, consumerism, and identity. Now, like most other solutions, this does come with its two implications. First of all, is the individual variation. Nostalgia has a different effect and potency on varying people, so the effect on a societal level might not be uniform. There's also big implementation challenges. When shifting the curriculum, we are effectively changing a predetermined set of laws that have already been in place, which could produce a lot of upfront costs and societal backlash, and the fact that there are still many emotionals prevalent in emotional influence decision-making. So removing nostalgia does not fully remove emotions when making decisions. These are my sources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martín. Your first question is, how did your research question evolve as you move through the research process?
Okay, so my research question, I love economy. So my research question simply started solely focused on economy. It was something along the lines of how does nostalgia influence consumer purchasing decisions, right? However, upon reading more on the psychological aspects of nostalgia, I realized that it has a much deeper impact. A lot of work that I found, such as Sedikides et al. And Professor Belk, found that nostalgia actually relates a lot to identity and who we are and who we define ourselves as. So instead of solely focusing on a marketing standpoint, my research question evolved to include how it also shapes identity-based behaviors.
Thank you. And your second question is, what are the implications of your findings to your community?
Okay, so the implications of my finding on a community, especially in a community that is, we are the new generation, we are a younger generation, and specifically in Ecuador, there's a lot of tactics that actually imply nostalgia, such as, I will take an example of Correa, saying that the Ecuador used to be better when he was in presidency. Increasing emotional literacy to make young people actually be more critically aware of what is actually being said and to differentiate between an idealized past and the present can actually lead to more rational decision-making instead of the emotional decision-making.
Thank you very much. Good job, Martín. Okay, we're moving on with our next presenter. we're approaching the end. After Bruno, we have Pedro, and we're gonna end our presentations with Iker Mota, okay? But now we have Bruno talking about false nostalgia in politics, which I think ties very nicely into Martin's last comment.
False nostalgia in politics. As of the end of 2017, 96 of 167 countries with populations of at least 500,000 people are democracies of some kind. Now, this means that democracies, politicians, and political campaigns involve and are involved in most of our lives around the globe. Politicians throughout decades have used different tactics and different methods for which they can appeal to masses and gain majority of the votes, gain popularity. One of these tactics that is going to be used today, explained today, is called false nostalgia. But what even is false nostalgia? Well, according to Johan Norberg, who is going to soon be mentioned again, false nostalgia is a compilation of memories, a sense of belonging, and a feeling of missing something from the past. These compilation of memories, the sense of belonging, and the feeling of missing is something that is tied with the idea that the past was better than the present. This, in turn, is nostalgia. Thank you to Johan Norberg and his article, False Nostalgia, and Judith Bini and her article, Maori Oral Narratives, Pakeha Written Texts. I came to my research question, which is, what are the effects on politics of using nostalgia and the manipulation of history in political campaigns? Now, before we start, some modern-day examples of false nostalgia in political campaigns so that the term is well understood. In President Trump's run for presidency in 2016, the slogan, "Make America Great Again," was one of the most popular and most beneficial or efficient appeals to the masses that Donald Trump used. This "Make America Great Again" statement is clearly a use of false nostalgia, since it alludes that the past of America was better than the present and that we should make it great again. Furthermore, in Turkey, the political party AKP says that the Ottoman Empire was the greatest state of Turkey before World War I, and that it was a beacon of religion and ultranationalism. As much as this might be true in their heads, this is a use of false nostalgia. This creates a sense of missing and a sense of belonging and certain memories in people and generations that didn't even live in those times. What are the consequences of nostalgia in political campaigns? Well, first of all, first step is using nostalgia in the political campaign, which eventually leads to the creation of expectations in the people. This creation of expectations about what the possible future of the government might be leads to the promising of the unachievable. These unachievable goals will, by the name of it, be unachievable. The government will not be able to go into the past and make America great again, or go back to the Ottoman Empire, which ended almost over a century ago. This, according to Mark Hetherington, an American political scientist, is what causes a distrust in the political system, which is my next subject. The most straightforward way of expressing distrust is to not vote at all. These are words claimed in the article from Mark Hugh and others, who are all professors of political sciences in the University of Brussels. This chart, that you can see above, is a chart that explains political distrust and puts it into numbers in both of the Belgian regions, the Flemish region and the Walloon region. You'll notice that the percentages and the numbers above are quite significant. Distrust is very present in Belgian society. But what does this lead to? What does this distrust in the political system eventually lead to? Which is the most important and dire consequence I'm going to be talking about today. The political polarization and social division. Political polarization entails quite serious risks. Political debates get bitter, and the very existence of a civil society may be threatened. This was said by Dixit and Weibull, both political sciences experts. and professors at prestigious universities. Now, political polarization is something that is extremely relevant and extremely present in most of today's societies. We see in America that the right is divided completely from the left, and none of the parts would want to talk to each other, and they debate all the time around controversial topics, but they use their bias and they use their own beliefs in the argument, eventually creating conflict, therefore threatening the very existence of civil society, as Dixit and Weibull mentioned. However, they also mentioned that there is a clear solution to this issue. Simply providing more information. When the government provides more information about these controversial topics and about these things, there is a less likely chance that political polarization will continue to increase. On the contrary, it will decrease, since people will now debate with reason, debate with logic, and talk around controversial topics that don't destroy friendships, don't destroy families, don't destroy civil societies, as mentioned before. This implies, of course, that every person receiving this information has a well-developed political opinion. If the person does not have a well-developed political opinion, they will be extremely subdued to being manipulated or being influenced, therefore negating the entire idea of providing more information. Also, people have to be willing to debate. People can't be focused around the idea that the topic is controversial and that it must not be debated because you could hurt somebody. No. People have to be willing to debate in order to talk things through, understand the other part's opinion, and understand why there is that opinion and where that's coming from. Now, the limitations are similar. Political bias. When people have a strong political bias, they're less likely to listen to the provided information if it goes against what they inherently believe. And also outside influence. When people, especially children and older people, are given with information, and that information could be false, they are completely vulnerable to that false information and therefore believing it, causing a disturbance in the possible arguments created. Thank you. These are my references.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Your first question is, what evidence did you gather that you didn't include? And why did you choose not to include it?
Of course. I gathered a lot of evidence about nostalgia and manipulation of history and how that looked in civil society and in modern countries. However, I did not include that because of time issues. If I focused a lot on my contextualization, I would never have gotten to the solution or explaining any of the other consequences of using false nostalgia in political campaigns.
Thank you. And what additional questions emerged from your research, and why are these questions important?
Well, a personal question, I'll mention two questions. A personal question of mine was why this sense of false nostalgia was originally used in political campaigns. And I tried to answer that myself by thinking rationally and thinking, well, people want to remember what's nice and people want to really go back to what they think was nicer, which is why it is effective to use it in politics. However, what I mostly thought about, and I saw in other people's conclusions as well, is why the continuing of the distrust in politics and why the distrust in politics as a whole causes political polarization. There are several theories. The one I based my research on was Dixit and Weibull's, which they mentioned that political distrust and the failure to achieve the unachievable goals is what causes this distrust and therefore causes polarization completely. Some people say, well then that's horrible that you didn't comply, and other people go to the other end. They say, oh, thank God you didn't make this happen. So that's when societies start to divide and political polarization is created.
Thank you so much. Good job, Bruno. Okay, so we are going to move forward with Iker Mota, who was supposed to be the last, but now the last is going to be Pedro. And I think this is just another demonstration of kindness. I told my students, and I only have like 6 students here, but I told my students that although you're presenting here individually, we are a collective and we can help each other. And this is how we're helping each other. Someone stepping up for another classmate whose mom is not here yet. I think that's enough for me to be happy about what my students have done today. So, Iker, I'll let you know when you can start, okay?
All right. Close your eyes and think of a movie from your past. Now open them. What movie is it? What does it make you feel? Can't repeat the past. Why, of course you can. F. Scott Fitzgerald. But can you really, Iker Mota? Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Iker Mota, and today I wanted to visit the impact of nostalgia on modern film and storytelling. But first off, what is nostalgia? Well, according to Oxford Languages, nostalgia is a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past. For example, this carousel. For someone, it might have been a place of joy when this was up and running, but now it's broken, it looks awful. But it can still give that person that feeling. The image was from the stimulus material, and so is this. This also inspired me to do this. The Maori oral narratives, Pateca written texts. And this inspired me because the Maori tribe passed on stories from generation to generation to generation, stories from who they were that brought them comfort, brought them a sense of, like I said here, wistful affection. And I thought to myself, what is our equivalent to that? Films. So, I started asking the question, what is the impact of nostalgia in modern storytelling and film? And then I came to an answer. The impact of nostalgia in modern storytelling and modern storytelling at its core is the corporatization of the movie-making industry. Now, I'll explain to this more. There are 3 types of movies that are being made now. The remakes, which are remakes from original and classic movies from our past, ones that could give us that longing or wistful affection. Legacy sequels that take place after, like 20 years after the original ones, that also give us that same feeling. And original concepts. These are completely original, maybe adapted from a book or 2, but aside from that, they're new stories told through the medium of film. Now, I'm going to talk about remakes and legacy sequels. Remakes. So, The Lion King, we all know The Lion King. When it released, it made $80 million, according to the LA Times archive in 1994. But adjusted to inflation, that is $1.7 billion. That is a lot of money. Not only that, The Lion King also spun off a successful Broadway musical that has grossed over $8 billion worldwide. So there's a lot of money to be made from this franchise. And Disney saw this and decided to make a remake. And of course, they released the remake in 2019, and to a lack of success, as it didn't have the heart the original one had. It didn't have that core feeling. But this isn't the only case where that is happening. There's also the legacy sequels. For example, the Jurassic Park films that have made a lot of money, $652 million, $229 million, and $181 million, all in each respective year. Adjusted for inflation, that is also $1.9 billion. Again, a lot of money. So of course, Universal saw the success of this and decided to start a new franchise from it. And that movie made $1.6 billion, and The Lion King made $1.6 billion too. Now, I'm going to talk about original concepts. Now, original concepts don't have this advantage of being connected to a pre-established IP, intellectual property. And so, for example, 2022's Babylon had a budget of 80 million and a box office of 65 million, meaning it lost money. Killers of the Flower Moon had a budget of $200 million and a box office of 158 million, also making it a box office bomb. It did not return its money. This is a review I found. The bottom line is, Killers of the Flower Moon will be a big budget financial disappointment at the box office, demonstrating why studios have historically put bigger budgets into films audiences show up in larger numbers. This is the issue in the movie-making industry. Nostalgia is a sentiment. Longing or wistful affection for the past is a predominantly positive and social emotion. Recent evidence suggests that nostalgia maintains psychological comfort. Now, what is the problem? The problem is studios aren't focusing on new ideas. They're always retelling the same ones because that's what we're comfortable with. What we need to do is, first possible solution. A possible solution to this issue is that instead of remakes and legacy sequels, movies that seek for instant profit, movie producers and studios should use part of the profits earned from that to innovate and create original concepts. And that has been shown to work. For example, 2021's Dune had a budget of $165 million and grossed over $402 million. But then again, why would they risk this? Why would they risk having a pre-established thing that they know will make money? For example, last year's Beetlejuice had made over $400 million. Now, possible solution 2. A second possible solution would be creating awareness on this by making people see that the best way to get original concepts made is by voting with their wallet, meaning paying to see things that are new. For example, last year's Flow had a budget of $4 million and made 36 million of them. And yet again, here's another example of maybe not putting all your eggs in one basket really works when it comes to pre-established IPs. As for example, 2023's Lightyear was an awful, awful movie because it didn't have that originality. What is the best solution? The best solution, I think, is that studios think of, giving the consumer the option to pick. Because nowadays, there's only remakes and legacy sequels. Giving them the option to pick, to go see what they want to support. And in that case, the consumers wins by far. Thank you. This is my bibliography.
Thank you so much, Iker. For your questions, the first question is, did your research go in a different direction than you originally expected?
I mean, I was already not well-versed, but I knew a lot about this beforehand. And so it didn't go to another direction because I had pre-established knowledge of where this journey led to. So I wasn't surprised by the results. But I was surprised by how many independent movies and original concepts, like I called them, have managed to make a lot of money.
Thank you so much. And what are the implications of your findings to your community?
To my community? Well, I would say, I would say that to my community, I think being aware of what we consume is something that is really important to us because, like the Maori tribe article said, stories are part of who we are part of, at our core, who we are as humans. And so by consuming things that don't have a soul and don't know what they are, I think we are ignoring that human element of us, of being able to tell new stories and come up with new things. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with retelling an old story. I'm just saying that it's gotten to an excessive level.
Okay, thank you so much. Good job.
Thank you, Mili.
Okay, so we are going to finish this very, very long day of presentations with Pedrito. Pedrito has been doing his research on the effects of depression in the elder community, which I think is it's a very important topic to touch upon, especially because, our elders are the ones who, they are part of our vulnerable population. Okay, so Pedrito, whenever I tell you.
Hello and welcome to my presentation on nostalgia therapy to treat late life depression. So for starters, what is late life depression? So medically recognized depression of individuals above the age of 65 is known as late life depression. This is a problem for various reasons. One is the diagnosement. According to Dr. Sandeep Sekon, a senior resident at the Department of Psychiatry at the Harvard Institute of Medical Sciences and Research, late life depression is both underdiagnosed and inadequately treated. These findings were also mirrored by Joanne Rada, a senior lecturer in professional and personal development at Kenan Medway Medical School, who also found that it is underrecognized and undertreated. Speaking of the treatment, according to Femke Lammers, an associate professor at Amsterdam UMC, while antidepressants are an effective treatment for individuals with major depression, there is currently not a universal treatment for all types of depression, particularly for more minor and mild types of depressive symptoms. Continuing to the prevalence of late life depression. According to the American Association for Geriatric Psychiatry, 15 out of every 100 adults over the age of 65 suffer from late life depression, which are very concerning numbers. With the knowledge of these problems, as well as with the stimulus package sources, False Nostalgia by Johan Norberg, and the 2024 Disease Facts and Figures by the Alzheimer's Association, I made the research question of how can nostalgic and reminiscence therapy help treat late life depression? But first, it is important to analyze some background context on late life depression to come up with a proper solution. The first of these problems that is important to analyze is the direct health risks of late life depression. According to Dr. Sandeep Sekon, the health symptoms of the elderly are very different from those with more early life depression, as the elderly are much more likely to express anxiety-related symptoms as opposed to those related with the sad mood. Additionally, the elderly are more likely to express both somatic and psychological psychotic effects. Dr. Joanne Rada also listed a variety of risk factors correlated with late life depression in one of her articles, such as chronic disease, acute myocardial infarctions, organic brain disease, metabolic disorders, malignancy, and disability. Moving on to suicide, which is also a huge risk of late life depression, as the elderly report way higher rates of suicide as opposed to younger people. In fact, according to Sekon, 25% of all suicides are elderly. Continuing, late life depression is actually very correlated to other diseases. In fact, it holds so many similarities to dementia that according to Sekon, it is often referred to as pseudo-dementia. In an article covering a study by Dr. David Vinkers, a doctor of medicine with a research focus and expertise in psychopathology, depression and cognitive impairment very often occur together in the old age, and cognitive decline often precedes late life depression as one of its root causes. Vinkers' article also covers that Alzheimer's is a source of cognitive decline. And Vinkers concluded that it is very helpful for caregivers to pay extra attention to depressive symptoms when they are treating for someone with a cognitively degenerative condition. Now for the treatments of late life depression, or lack thereof, because according to Joanne Rada, late life depression is far less likely to be correctly diagnosed as depression, and it is often attributed to normal aging, which is a huge problem because this means that formal treatments are in general much less available and much less effective than they should be. This leaves the only other option as informal treatments. In the stimulus packet document, 2024 Alzheimer's Disease Facts and Figures by the Alzheimer's Association, it is mentioned that over 11 million Americans provide unpaid care for a friend or family member suffering from Alzheimer's. As mentioned earlier, through Vinkers' study, these caregivers should already be paying extra attention to depressive symptoms due to the fact that the people that they are caring for are suffering from cognitive decline. However, in an article by Namki Choi, PhD, a professor of gerontology at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work, and Graham McDougall, a retired NIH research student, gerontologist, and nurse practitioner, they detail that many older adults' emotional needs may have not been met by their informal treatment, and thus, formal emotional support may be required to meet their needs. With these knowledge and these problems caused by late-life depression, as well as through Johann Norberg's stimulus source, false nostalgia, this led me to the possible solution of employing nostalgia and reminiscence therapy as a formal and even informal solution to late-life depression. First, to understand what is nostalgia and reminiscence therapy. So nostalgia and reminiscence therapy is a type of therapy which, according to Sueme Liu, a researcher at Sichuan Provincial People's Hospital, works by stimulating the brain to awaken positive memories. These memories can be memories about birthplace, childhood sports and games, school days, love, food, and holidays. A study conducted by Yang Huang and others tested the impacts of nostalgic therapy on the overall quality of life, as well as the positive impact on depression. The study split 89 individuals, all above the age of 65, into a control and a nostalgia therapy group. The nostalgia therapy group were instructed to recall nostalgic events, and the study utilized a test known as the WHO QOL BREF, which tests the quality of life in 4 main domains, those being physical health, psychological, social, and environmental. This graph shows the results of this study. I'll make it a little bigger there. So the main positive results of the study were seen in the domains of physical health and social relationships. And there were also major positive benefits seen in the MMS-EE, which is a test to test cognitive decline, and the DDS-15, which is a test to screen depression in senior citizens. What these researchers concluded is that the study's findings indicate that group nostalgia therapy has a favorable effect on the quality of life and cognitive function of those who suffer with depression. Additionally, that the beneficial benefits of nostalgic therapy also extended to individuals with probable Alzheimer's disease or even Parkinson's. These findings were also mirrored by other studies, as Yang Huang's findings were backed up by a study by Sueme Liu, which tested musical nostalgia therapy to treat Alzheimer's and came to many of the same conclusions as Huang's study, particularly those relating to depression, Alzheimer's disease, and the fact that it can be used both formally and informally. Which, speaking of which, an article by Dr. Emily Dodd, a senior research fellow at the University of the West of England, also came to a similar conclusion in her study of nostalgia therapy inside of an informal setting, and found that this type of therapy can be used both formally and informally. All this isn't to say that nostalgic therapy isn't without its downsides, as it has limitations. In fact, all 3 of the studies mentioned the exact same limitation, which is that they use very small sample sizes, and that larger sample sizes and more research is required to cement nostalgic therapy's positive effects for all of these positive benefits. Additionally, according to Aram Kancic, a master's graduate in clinical psychology who studied in the University of Western Ontario and York University, nostalgic reflections can also have unintended negative downsides. These can include feelings of isolation, dwelling on the past for too long, or even causing sadness or inaction in the present due to dwelling too much on that past that he's being reflected on. Even so, medical institutions and caretakers worldwide should become more aware of the positive benefits derived from nostalgic therapy and attempt its implementation if it proves that it could be helpful to those under their care. Those are my sources. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Pedrito. Okay, so your first question is, what information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate, and how would you have included it?
So there actually wasn't a lot of information that I wasn't able to find. Generally, the biggest thing that I was missing was just more articles covering what stuff like Yang Huang's study already covered, which is why I spent so much talking about Yang Huang's study, because there generally aren't a lot of studies covering specifically nostalgic therapy for late-life depression. Some of the articles that I viewed either talk about nostalgic therapy, but for depression just in general, not for late life. Others talked about its effects for other conditions, which wasn't really relevant to my research. So if there anything, I just wish there were more articles covering how late-life depression is affected by nostalgic therapy.
Very good, thank you. And what additional questions emerged from your research, and why are these questions important?
So as I previously mentioned, I stumbled across a lot of articles which mentioned the effects of nostalgic therapy, not only on late-life depression, but on a lot of different conditions. So I was wondering through my research if nostalgic therapy can be so good for late life depression and it can be beneficial, how else can it be beneficial not only to other types of diseases, but to general quality of life and to general well-being of those in general? Because I stumbled across a huge amount of articles covering nostalgia therapy, and only a fraction of them were relevant to my research. So I was questioning how nostalgic therapy could be applied not only to late life depression, but to other conditions in general. And this is clearly important because by exploring how nostalgic therapy can be used in these ways, it can also help increase the quality of life and well-being of people suffering from all kinds of conditions.
Thank you so much. Good job. Okay, and with this, we finish our first day of individual multimedia presentations. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming here, and I hope that I see you tomorrow. Thank you.